Welcome back to the most accurate podcast here at 4for4 Football. As always, I'm your host, John Daigle, ahead of the fantasy playoffs with friend in life, the man himself, who definitely doesn't have the ranking set just yet because we are waiting on a lot of injury news, John Paulson. How's it going?
It's going pretty well. I mean, we're in week 15. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. I think most leagues are in the playoffs or getting very close to the playoffs. So crucial time, crunch time.
It's typically mandatory this time of year for every host to come on and say, wow, I'm just so surprised it's week 15 already. Allow me to tell you I'm not, because it feels like week 15. We are definitely in that portion of the season where everything is touch and go. That's why we have a big show today, including tonight's Thursday night game between the Chargers and Raiders. No Keenan Allen, no Justin Herbert, the quarterback, for the rest of the year. And so we are looking at Easton Stick to Josh Palmer and Austin Ekeler, while on the other side of the ball, Aiden O'Connell, Davante Adams seems like he's going to play, and most likely Josh Jacobs is out. Let's start with the Charger side, because at least there are only two players to trust. Well, two players that you could play anyhow between Ekeler and Palmer. So without Allen and from Easton Stick, how are you ranking Palmer and his return from injured reserve?
I would feel a lot more confident in Palmer if Justin Herbert were still at quarterback.
Sure.
We have Easton Stick at quarterback. So I think he's playable. He's not a lock or really confident play, but I have him at 33.5 PPR as a wide receiver, low end wide receiver 3. He's kind of in there with the Romeo Doubs of the world where you might get something out of him, you might not. The volume should be there, but Vegas is 8th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. It's not a great matchup, but it's not a terrible matchup either. I just don't know who else is going to generate yardage for them other than Ekeler, perhaps Gerald Everett, Quentin Johnston, but he's been a roller coaster all year. I mean, I think you nailed it. Like Ekeler, I think you can trust both as a runner because the matchup's good, and as a receiver, and then Palmer in the receiving game, maybe Gerald Everett if you're trying to stream a tight end and need a dart throw.
And what Brandon Staley did come true. He did mix in Josh Kelly and Isaiah Spiller for carries, but the carries weren't what we were worried about for Ekeler anyhow. It was the passing usage, and that didn't get taken away. So Ekeler is still a low-end RB1, someone you can trust in PPR leagues because Kelly and Kelly and Spiller are not taking that role at all, at least for him. On the other side of the ball,
I just wanted to mention Kelly. Actually, I think Spiller just kind of took most of Kelly's work because Kelly ended up with 3 carries. Let me just look at his game. I mean, he's been at 6'3", 6'5", 3. So he was on the low end of his usual range, and I think it sort of lit a little bit of a fire under Ekeler because he went for 10 for 51 in the running game, 5 for 49 as a receiver. He also played 72% of snaps, so I'm not worried about his workload.
And it was a plus matchup, as we discussed last week, against the Broncos defense. Not as easy, this one, but still one we can have confidence in Ekeler for whatever that means at this stage of the season. On the other side of the ball, how are you viewing Davante Adams in this matchup, along with Zamir White, who we are expecting to start in place of Jacobs?
Adams is sort of a volume-based play. The Chargers are 23rd in just fantasy points allowed to receivers. It's a pretty good matchup for him. You're just hoping that he can get there on his 10 or 12 targets that he gets. I think maybe you feel a little bit better about him because Josh Jacobs is likely to sit, and maybe the Raiders are a little bit more pass-friendly, pass-heavy than normally they are. I feel like Zamir White is a trap. I've been ranking him. I'm looking at, I had him at 32, and I'm like, this is high, like over Singletary or Donta Foreman. I think I would play those guys over him. There is an opportunity here for a 15, 17, 18 touch type game where he does well. The matchup isn't bad against the Chargers. They're 20th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, but I do think that he splits the snaps with Amir Abdullah, and Abdullah is getting most of the passing game work and getting most of the receptions out of the backfield amongst the running backs. So I don't know, like in this situation where you're having the backup being plugged in, I'd like him to be really talented, the running game be strong, and a good matchup to really rank him very high. And I'm not sure about really all those factors right now. So I think he is a worthy dart throw if you need 15 touches, but I'm not confident that he's going to have a breakout game.
There is some respectable money coming in on the Chargers too, and if that's the case, in any negative game script, as you alluded to, it would be Amir Abdullah. Not only did he show that last week with 7 routes to White's 3 whenever Jacobs left, but just in general all year long. That's why I haven't had White ranked as a high contingency option, because he doesn't get the passing usage. And so in any negative game script, that would be miserable for White's outlook. So if you need to, of course you can start him, but I do not consider White to be just a simple plug and play in place of Jacobs like you. 3 Saturday games for everyone listening, because the NFL does not care about your family. Beginning with the Vikings at the Bengals, with Nick Mullins under center and Justin Jefferson back in our lives. Let's get to your thoughts on the Vikings passing offense in this one, since a lot of people will have to go to Jefferson and TJ Hawkinson.
I feel pretty good about it. Nick Mullins is probably an upgrade as far as a pure passer over Joshua Dobbs. Dobbs added the running element to, from a fantasy standpoint, but I think Mullins is either as good or better. So I feel decent about Justin Jefferson. If he's able to play, it looks like he's going to play. I think the last word on that was that he might have a bruised rib or something. So it didn't look like it was too likely to keep him out. Addison is, wide receiver 4 for me. Hawkinson looks like a strong play against the Bengals. This is a kind of a shaky Bengals team that has played a little bit better since the Burrow injury, but still giving up points and yardage. They're last in the league against tight ends, so Hawkinson's kind of a must play. They're 21st in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. So Jefferson looks like a high-end wide receiver 2, low-end wide receiver 1. We just don't know the rapport that he's going to have with Nick Mullins. I mean, we're hoping that everything is normal, but if Jefferson were playing with Kirk Cousins, we'd probably have him ranked in the top 3 or 4. So having him ranked at 13, which is where I have him, I think is a reasonable expectation for him.
The Bengals the past 2 weeks have stuffed running backs as well, although they still rank dead last in gains of 10+ yards allowed to opposing running backs. So on paper, you could go either way for Ty Chandler, likely in place of Alexander Mattison as an every down back, since Madison has yet to practice through Thursday. But I do want to step back and note that the 2 running backs they stuffed were Zach Moss and Travis Etienne, who, as of late anyways, Zach Moss is clearly not the same player he was the first time he took over for Jonathan Taylor. And so those are 2 running backs who haven't been gaining explosive runs anyways. So I still want to have a lot of faith in Ty Chandler in this spot, since whenever Alexander Mattison left in the second half, it was quite literally all Chandler to Kane and Wangwu, who even ran just 1 route in his place.
Yeah, I got Chandler at 24. I think he's a low-end running back 2 this week. And you mentioned the running backs that the Bengals had stuffed. They did sort of limit Travis Etienne, but he still got 45 yards rushing and a touchdown plus 34 yards receiving. So 79 total yards plus the touchdown. He ended up having a good game. So really the only data point we have to say that the Bengals are really much improved against the run is Zach Moss. And he actually has struggled the last 2 weeks running the ball, not doing what he did earlier in the year, which has been kind of surprising because the Colts have had a pretty strong running game. So I think I feel pretty good about Chandler. I feel certainly better about him than I do Zamir White.
And I know everyone wants to start Jake Browning. I definitely want to be behind consensus on him and more down on him than the industry this week, because it's a rough matchup. And at some point, whenever this magic from Browning goes away, I'm just not sure he scores anything at all, because now we've seen in his 3 starts, 43% of his pass attempts have come behind the line of scrimmage, 35% of his passing yards behind the line of scrimmage as well, 2 of his 4 touchdowns. He's been getting there off of screens, and in terms of fantasy production, just falling forward for 2 1-yard touchdowns. Not as if he's adding mobility. He's just happened to have 2 quarterback sneaks in that territory. So against this Vikings defense that literally hasn't allowed a single quarterback to exceed 275 passing yards against them since week 5, and that was Patrick Mahomes, I don't have the same amount of faith of Jake Browning as a lot of other people do.
I felt better about him last week. Certainly the matchup was better. I have him ranked at 15, and he's sort of in that range with Kyler Murray in a bad matchup with the 49ers. Joe Flacco, who is throwing the ball a lot, 44, I think 45, 44 attempts in the last 2 games. But he's, the matchup against Chicago is not ideal. They're 5th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to quarterbacks. I don't know where to rank Geno Smith because I don't know if he's going to play, but I've got him at 18 right now. So that's the sort of group that he's with. I've got Lawrence and Goff and Russell Wilson and all those guys ahead of Browning this week.
I've been having to do gymnastics in a couple leagues of quarterbacks, and that's why in the waiver column, I also ranked them accordingly for everyone. I would start, like if Drew Lock starts in place of Geno Smith, which you won't know, so you won't even have to make the decision most likely, but I am trying to start either Geno or Drew Lock over Jake Browning. I also think Tommy DeVito is a better start than Jake Browning this week, because again, when this magic runs out, it is going to be very scary for Browning's points, and at least DeVito is adding quite literally the highest scramble rate of any quarterback since he started, more so than Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts too. I would trust the rushing floor much more than expecting Browning to continue this personally. For Browning though, it's still Jamar Chase, who I understand didn't get there last week, and Joe Mixon, oddly enough, who has now handled back-to-back season lows in his share of backfield touches, but has gotten there on touchdowns. So just the fact we can look at his touch counts the past 2 weeks and see that he's handled 25 and 24 touches, it's enough to have a little more confidence in him, even though you have to understand that the touchdowns have certainly helped.
The Vikings rush defense has been pretty good too. 3.62 yards per carry allowed to running backs since week 9. They're only giving up a total of 100 total yards on average since week 9 to opposing backfield. So if he's splitting time with Chase Brown, I wouldn't be surprised if this is sort of a 60, 65 total yard game for Mixon, and then you're really counting on those touchdowns to get you there. That's why I've got him ranked as an RB2 instead of an RB1 this week.
It's also why I mentioned Brown as a speculative pickup. Definitely someone I want to stash in the fantasy playoffs because we've now seen the juice he has. But not only do I not want to start in this game, obviously, because it's only 10 touches per game. He's basically Cincinnati Jaylen Warren, but it's a tough matchup as well. So on limited touches, not out-touching Mixon, it's not a spot really where we think we can throw Brown out here and expect the same 54-yard screen to get him there again. Just a worrisome spot, honestly, overall for the Bengals offense. The second game on Saturday between the Steelers and Colts, not worrisome because we've seen this Steelers defense continue to fall apart. And it's a great bounce back spot, not only for Gardner Minshew and for Michael Pittman, who has become Keenan Allen before our very eyes, double-digit targets in 5 of the last 6 games, 8 catches and 6 straight as well. But a good spot for Josh Downs too, who's kind of disappeared. If you're in a tough spot where you need a flex option, you have all these 6 different guys who you're teetering between. I do like Josh Downs. Steelers are allowing the 3rd most yards per catch from the slot. Also top 5 in receiving, or 2nd in yards per game from the slot as well, where Josh Downs plays. So those are my favorite plays. Your thoughts on Zach Moss, who continues getting all the usage?
Yeah, I mean, he's a volume-based play, and this is a pretty... I wouldn't say it's a great matchup. The Steelers are middle of the road against running backs, over the last 10 weeks or so in terms of adjusted fantasy points allowed. So I've got him at 7, but the initial projections had him coming in at 2 or 3. And I just can't get behind the productivity of the Colts rushing game, given what they've done the last couple of weeks. But this could be, whenever we have these types of spells for these teams, they are focusing on it and trying to improve it. And that's why we see bounce back games. I think this might be a bounce back game for Zach Moss.
He's had 9 carries inside the 10-yard line in place of Jonathan Taylor these past 2 weeks, and he just hasn't scored a touchdown at all. I know there was a clip of one where Quentin Nelson was holding and that touchdown got called back. But again, as I keep repeating, it's cheating. That doesn't regress. So it doesn't matter. He got held, and that's the only reason he scored the touchdown. But also, it's the fact that he hasn't recorded a single explosive run in this time. Again, he's not the same player he was when he took over for Taylor. He became Bills Zach Moss overnight, and that's not a good thing. So yes, we are still starting him as a touch-based option, but absolutely worried about it, his ceiling performance in this game. On the other side of the ball, for those that are really desperate, given that the Colts defense is also really bad, we saw enough riskiness for Mitch Trubisky that I don't mind going there either. The fact that he could continue to add his legs, and the Colts secondary in particular is soft, where we're attacking with Deontay Johnson and Pat Freiermuth, I actually don't hate it if you're that desperate.
Yeah, that's not a terrible play either. They're middle of the road against quarterbacks. I'm sort of like lukewarm on the Steeler passing game in general, but I think the running game
As he
really
should
has
be.
the running game has a really nice matchup. The Colts are 32nd adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back, so I think Najee Harris and Jalen Warren could both get there. The Colts are giving up 176 yards. Total yards and 0.8 touchdowns on average to opposing backfield since week 9. So they've been just getting chewed up, 4.57 yards per carry. So that's how I think the Steelers will try to move the ball. But, the quarterbacks have to play a role at some point. Mitch Trubisky, decent backup option for the Steelers. I think Deontay Johnson's a decent play. Less confident about George Pickens. And I think Freiermuth's a reasonable tight end streamer this week.
Pickens definitely droppable. I know he's one of those name values that everyone holds on to, but now that it's time of year where we have to start players or have high contingency stashes, which we saw Pickens was averaging a 28% target share without Deontay Johnson. So if you need a wide receiver stash, you can certainly do that and think that you could start him again if Deontay gets injured. But as long as Deontay's playing, you just can't possibly start George Pickens in a fantasy playoff game unless you're truly, truly desperate. And finally, on Saturday night, it is the Broncos at the Lions. And I know the Lions are favored by 5 points. This total is increasing a bit anyhow. I'm going to assume it's for their running backs because right now, Jared Goff is not the quarterback who can beat the Broncos secondary, who continues just to smash opposing defenses, Justin Herbert included, who in that first half, the Chargers didn't have a single point. Justin Herbert had a 5.5 yards per attempt. They were shutting him down too. And so I would think that their Lions are going to attack this game through both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, who are incredible starts in this matchup.
Yeah, it makes sense. The Broncos are terrible against the run. The Lions have a strong running game. I do think we have the home road split with Jared Goff a bit. I think he has a better game than he's been having, but I don't think this is going to go through the passing game by any means for the Lions. It's going to be Gibbs and Montgomery.
It can go through the passing game for the Broncos, though, because Javonte Williams is getting these carries, but obviously still recovering from his injury as well. You just can't run behind the Broncos offensive line, who's done a much better job pass blocking for Russ Wilson, who is adding now a little bit of a rushing floor. So Russell Wilson also, I think, is a viable start this week against a abysmal Lions defense. And Cortland Sutton, we know that's where the ball goes to and no one else. And then maybe if you are desperate for a tight end, it seems like Greg Dulcich is going to return and play this game too. And we know last time he came back from his hamstring injury, Sean Payton just threw him right in. And he had 2 targets on 7 routes and then got injured again. So I kind of think they actually throw him right back in. And again, it's an amazing spot against this Broncos defense that doesn't stop anyone.
Yeah, Wilson, Sutton, Stacks might be good this week. Wilson, I have him ranked as a low end QB1. There's just not a whole lot going on. I'm looking at Jerry Jeudy like this. Oh, maybe this is a week where you can start Jerry Jeudy. He's at 51 in my rankings. I just don't feel confident with some of the other guys around him to tell our subscribers to go out there and start him given his lack of usage, even though this is a spot where he could have a decent game. Dulcich is an interesting play too, especially if you're hurting a tight end there. He'll probably be better than some of these options here in the tight end 2 ranks.
Or if you're playing DFS, I'm excited about the Saturday slate. It's so ugly that we can maneuver a lot of these pieces.
I was going to ask, did they set this series up? Because all these teams have winning records. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that until just now.
There's no way they've done anything in the schedule on purpose this year. No possible way. But it is a fun Saturday slate. I'll give them that.
Yeah.
Sunday, however, starts with the Bucs and the Packers. One of the few games on Sunday, actually, I have confidence in both offenses to move the ball. We saw Jordan Love suffer against the Giants on Monday night, but we've seen him elevate the Packers offense whenever he's played against 4 defenses. And this is another abysmal spot because the Bucs are not only banged up, they're also now over the last month not getting a pass rush, 26th in pass rush over the last month as well. And so it's just a spot where Jordan Love can bring Jaden Reed, who has a 23% target share without Christian Watson along. Romeo Doubs, we've seen have touchdown equity, so you can play Romeo Doubs, assuming Christian Watson, who didn't practice on Thursday, is out yet again. And then A.J. Dillon didn't practice Thursday either. I'm not sure who we're getting at running back, but your thoughts on the Packers offense?
Yeah, Aaron Jones might be back. I have him in the rankings just because he felt like he was getting closer last week, and we talked about them probably not playing him against the Giants with that turf and at the Meadowlands. And so I feel like he might play this week. I've got him at 27. He might be limited. It's not a good matchup against the Bucs rush defense, but they're more of a pass funnel. So I have Love at 9 amongst quarterbacks. I think he's a really strong play. You mentioned Reed I have him at 27, Dobbs at 36, and like Dontayvion Wicks was a little bit of a sleeper last week. It didn't pan out. I actually tweeted out a prop, my second one of the year, and it first one won. I was getting cocky, and the second one did not go over. So I've got him. I think he picked up an injury too, so he's a guy to keep an eye on. If he gets a full practice in this week, then I feel a little bit more confident about him because he did see 60-something% of the snaps, which I think bodes well for the future, especially against the Bucs, who are 30th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. And of course, Tucker Kraft had a big game. He led the Packers in receiving against the Giants. I think he's certainly streamable again.
And for the Bucs, it's very clearly just two guys between Mike Evans, who I understand 1 catch, 8 yards last week, but it was also double teamed on every single snap. So you can go right back to Mike Evans in a smash spot, and then Rachaad White, who continues getting every single touch. I understand Chase Edmonds popped up for 10 last week, but that's because White also reached 27 and need a couple breathers here. So those are the two guys for the Bucs you were literally starting.
Yeah, the Packers have given up, I think, the second most rushing yards per game this season. Terrible rush defense for the Packers. They do a little bit better at home, but I think White's going to be a fine play. And you didn't mention Cade Otton, but I think he is streamable against the Packers. They seem to forget about tight ends when they're trying to scheme their defenses.
As someone who writes about the Raven Wire column every week, no one's picking up Cade Otton. He's there literally every single week. If you need him, pick him up. You could drop him and no one will pick him up either way, but he's literally run the third most routes among all tight ends since they're bye, and no one cares at all. Everyone would rather try to grab Donald Parham or some bum who's not going to do anything. So whatever. Cade Otton's out there. If you want him, he's there. Falcons and the Panthers. And let's start with the Falcons offense because we had a Drake London blow-up game. Left a little bit on the table too. A 40-yard catch that got knocked out of his hands early on. But really, as I was trying to hammer home last week, we've now seen that Drake London does have a rapport where he commands targets from Desmond Ridder in particular, and has now seen at least 20% of the team's targets in 7 consecutive games with Ridder. Also, for their running game, it's still Bijan Robinson, who has now seen touch counts of 23, 19, 21, and 15 to his last 4 starts for the Falcons in a great spot against this Panthers front 7.
The Panthers have yielded the most rushing touchdowns, 21. They're 11th in rushing yards allowed. They're pretty much a run funnel, which plays right into the hands of the Falcons because that's what they want to do. So I think Bijan's a really strong start. And I agree that London is definitely playable, even though this is not the greatest matchup on paper. He does have the cornerbacks, like from a fantasy points allowed per route covered, aren't special. So it's more of a volume thing. That's what we have to worry about, I think, with Atlanta, is that they just don't throw the ball a whole lot. But London is the alpha in this passing attack, so he should see his 7 to 9 targets. If this is the game, I believe that in week 1 he only had 1 target, and then things sort of turned around for him. But he's doing a lot better right now, so I feel pretty confident in him as a wide receiver 3.
Any thoughts on the Panthers, who literally had the league's highest run play rate last week because they are trying to kill the clock to the end of the season? They're trying to get out of here.
Chuba Hubbard. I think he is a viable low-end RB2. They're running in the face of bad matchups. They don't care. He's getting tons and tons of touches. And I know folks probably aren't in the playoffs if they have to start Chuba Hubbard, but you never know in certain leagues. I think he's a volume-based play. The Falcons are sort of middle of the road against running backs. I don't like starting anyone else in this entire offense. 25
and 23 carries for Hubbard the last 2 weeks under Thomas Brown calling plays. For the Giants at the Saints, I mentioned Tommy DeVito, and it's because the Saints are technically 6-point favorites on paper at home. I can't possibly believe that, though. Not only because the blitz is going to be coming in Derek Carr's face, but because with Tommy DeVito, again, 11% of his dropbacks he scrambled on in his starts, including 10 carries against the Packers on Monday night. Not only that, but his full weapons are now completely healthy, and Wan'Dale Robinson being pelted underneath. Jalen Hyatt, who didn't pop up in the box score, but I still trust his 25% target share he got before the bye. So again, I do think Tommy DeVito is against the Saints defense, allowing a league high 27 rushing yards to opposing quarterbacks per game. I do think Tommy DeVito is a viable streamer, and I like the Giants this week.
You really love Tommy DeVito. I'm gonna have to bump him up in the ranks.
I like rushing quarterbacks.
Yeah, he does have the nice rushing floor. I hope to not be watching this game much, but we'll see what happens with the Red Zone channel. After the Giants, of course, beat the Packers, not a fan. Wan'Dale he played well. I don't know if he's getting healthier or if they're just incorporating more in the offense, but he seems like the most dangerous player in that passing attack. Although Jalen Hyatt had been doing better, obviously Saquon Barkley cruised over the Packers rush defense, so he's a solid RB1 as well. I do think DeVito is streamable. Your stat about the Saints giving up a lot of rushing yardage to a running quarterback, that does appeal to me. The Saints, I think, is tough to play in New Orleans, though. It seems like that Saints team does play better at home.
Yeah, and they are getting healthier. For the Saints, however, I believe it's going to be Derek Carr under center. Either way, though, Chris Olave continues getting there. Didn't miss Wednesday's practice with an ankle injury, so something we just have to monitor throughout the week. Rashid Shaheed came back. I would imagine he plays this game, but Olave now a touchdown or 100 yards in 5 consecutive games has really come on strong this past month of the year.
I think Olave is a solid start. With Shaheed potentially back and Taysom Hill potentially back, then the offense gets squeezed a little bit, and maybe that floor is a little bit lower with Olave. But the Giants are 26th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. It's a fine matchup. Shaheed is like a DFS dart throw, perhaps, and I don't know who would be starting him right now, first game back, but we're getting excited about him with Michael Thomas sidelined, and I think there's a lot of talent there as well. So Shaheed could surprise, and of course Taysom Hill comes in as a low-end tight end 1 in his first game back. He'll see his rushing and receiving workload and maybe throw a pass or two.
Absolutely starting Taysom Hill if he plays, no doubt about it. For the Texans at the Titans, we're just going to lose a lot of push. Like, I even wanted to stream Will Levis initially against the Texans if CJ Stroud was in, just because we've now seen the Texans secondary fall apart. 8.1 yards per attempt and 19.5 fantasy points per game to quarterbacks since week 5. But with Davis Mills most likely in for CJ Stroud, according to some reports, and probably without Nico Collins and Tank Dell, I just don't know what kind of push we get for Levis. So it just seems like a Derrick Henry game and Titan streaming week, to be honest.
Yeah, I don't. I'm reasonably optimistic about Levis. I have him at 21. He's a streamable player, but you're not going to see a shootout like you might with Stroud at quarterback. Stroud is still in the concussion protocol. Davis Mills is preparing as the starter, and he's down Nico Collins and Tank Dell. So you're looking at like Noah Brown as the number 1 receiver. I believe Robert Woods was resting, but he's going to play. You've got Brevin Jordan at tight end. So it's just not a whole lot of offensive weapons out there. Both teams might go run heavy and just try to win the game that way.
It's not pretty. And for the Titans, obviously, if you need a stream, Chico Conquo, you can get there. But DeAndre Hopkins really the only player we are trusting from Will Levis. And it is a good spot. But again, with Davis Mills, the same quarterback, they did everything they could to replace last year. It's not going well, especially if Nico Collins doesn't play. Bears at Browns is interesting because, yes, Joe Flacco has lit up the Rams and the Jaguars, 2 defenses with bad secondaries that can't get a pass rush at all. And for one, the Bears are not that at all. Like, the Bears literally, since they got Jalen Johnson back in week 6, are allowing the fewest yards per attempt of any opposing defense. Not only that, but stuffing running backs at the league's lowest yards per carry. So the Bears defense is an elite one. But also now you have the Browns who are on their third and fourth string offensive tackles. They're just banged up in the trenches. They're missing 2 starting safeties as well. They're still waiting on Denzel Ward and Anthony Walker. Like, we have to know their statuses by Sunday too. So it's just a really rough spot to think you're going to get like the same Joe Flacco you got the last 2 weeks if you're trying to stream him. I'm worried about him.
They're going to have to get the ball out quickly,
Yeah.
as you alluded to. And the reason I'm sort of bullish on it is because they're going to have a really tough time running. So they're going to have to throw, and they're going to have to figure out how to protect him and allow him to attempt his 40-plus passes, because I don't know how else they're going to move the ball. The Bears did get kind of worked over a bit by Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. They both had, I think, over 6 yards per carry, but that's the only team really to have done that. And they also did it in a loss. So I don't know how effective it was for them. So I do think it's going to be a pass heavy attack for the Browns. It's just a matter of whether or not they can figure out the protections enough to give him enough time. He's not gonna be able to stand back there and throw deep bombs to David Njoku this week.
For the Bears, however, any thoughts on their backfield as we saw Deontay Foreman return, and then that led Foreman to outtouch both Khalil Herbert and Roschon Johnson 13-4 combined?
The data we have suggests that Foreman is the clear RB1 there. I don't think he did anything to lose the job last week, so I've got him ranked as a low-end running back 3, just understanding that at any time the winds could shift a different direction. They could go with the hot hand if he has a couple of bad carries and, Roschon Johnson or Khalil Herbert comes in and rips off a 9-yard run. They might just switch things. But I think right now the best bet is Foreman. And then I think obviously DJ Moore is a must play. I think he's been excellent. The Browns are pretty good on defense in general, but they're middle of the road against receivers. So he's a must play. The guy I'm a little bit worried about in terms of starting is Cole Kmet, because the Browns are number 1 in adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends.
DJ Moore now 21.3 fantasy points per game with Justin Fields, single-digit fantasy points without him. For the Jets at the Dolphins, another spot I'm really worried about. And I understand if you have Tua, if you have Tyreek Hill, who's day-to-day, Jalen Waddle, Raheem Mostert, you're starting them all. But we've seen the Dolphins play without their starting center now, who just got moved on IR for the rest of the year. Connor Williams, I believe. And without him, even going back to the Eagles game, Tua was miserable because Tua's been a bad quarterback under pressure. And the Dolphins are missing their entire starting offensive line in this one. Against the Eagles, for example, 216, a touchdown, 1 pick, 6.8 yards per attempt. Tua was under pressure on 46% of his dropbacks this past week as well, which is why the Dolphins offense didn't necessarily reach their ceiling in that game either. So I think it's actually going to be a lower scoring affair for the Dolphins Jets, that we're not going to see the same Miami offense that we've seen in the past for sure.
Yeah, and you're also looking at a really good Jets secondary that tends to stifle. I mean, we saw the Dolphins kind of run roughshod over the Jets through the air. Both Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle got there. I think they both went over 100 yards in the first matchup. I don't think we're necessarily going to see that this week, so I'm a little bit down on the passing game. Connor Williams' injury is significant. I think, did he get hurt in game, or was this prior to the Monday night game?
It was in game, I believe, and you have to remember that we have the Robert Williams. We have a lot of other offensive line injuries as well.
I think it's one thing when you lose a player in game and how that messes up your offense, but when you have a week to adjust for it and account for it, I think they'll be a little bit better and a little more sorted on that offensive line with whoever is filling in for him. And I should know that as a fantasy prognosticator, as who is the backup center for the Miami Dolphins. But so I'm still thinking that they'll be all right. The way to beat the Jets typically is the running game. So I think, Mostert and Achane are going to be fine. I think the concern, a little bit is the is the passing game. But if you have Tyreek Hill, you're starting him. If you have Jalen Waddle, you're probably starting him. And those are the two main guys, pass catchers for the Dolphins.
I think the moral of this week is you're going to see the projections on Sleeper, Yahoo, and whatever, and I would ignore them. I think even if your team looks bad, I think you're live, because we're going to get some low scores in fantasy this week because these offenses are in the worst possible spots, honestly, across the board. So, yeah, even like, we'll get to the Bills-Cowboys game in a second, but I think every bad team is live this week to upset the higher seed, which is exciting. For Chiefs at Patriots, 2 players for the Chiefs, and that is Travis Kelce and Rashee Rice. Other than that, I know everyone is trying to do the dance between CEH and Jerick McKinnon. I talked about him in the waiver show. What are your thoughts on those 2 running backs?
I think the Patriots are top half of the league, top third of the league, and receiving yards allowed to running backs. They're really good against the run. So I'm concerned about Edwards-Helaire just as a pure runner, but maybe one or both of those players could get there as a receiver. McKinnon, we've seen him have 2 touchdown upside. So I think if I'm desperate for upside, McKinnon is an interesting play. I've got him slightly ahead of Edwards-Helaire, even though Edwards-Helaire out-touched McKinnon last week. McKinnon did get the rushing touchdown and, is more of a factor in the passing game.
For the Patriots, it doesn't look like Ramondre Stevenson's going to play, so we can go back to Ezekiel Elliott, who out-touched Ty Montgomery. Ty Montgomery, who was waived the following game, so he's not even with the team anymore, but he out-touched him 29-1. Literally handled everything. Where do you have Zeke ranked, assuming he's once again without Stevenson?
I got him at 12, and if you asked me at the beginning of the season, am I going to rank Ezekiel Elliott in the top 12 this year, I would be surprised. But here he is, Stevenson sidelined. KC's defense is not quite as good as it was, a month or 2 ago. They're 22nd in adjusted fantasy points allowed to running backs, and if he's going to see 25 touches, then you have to rank him this high because he's probably going to get there.
And the Patriots receivers, we just don't know yet. Demario Douglas returned. He's still in concussion protocol, but he returned to practice on Wednesday. So it seems like he would play. And if that's the case, we expect him to lead the team in targets, whatever that means, in a much tougher spot against Kansas City's healthy defense. But if Douglas is out, we remember that Davante Parker, who got rolled out last week, had a 37.5% target share over Juju, who then led the Patriots in targets last week against the Steelers since Parker was out. So it's literally all just wait until Sunday and figure it out then, because you know what the fallout is, depending who plays.
And you're probably down bad if you're starting Patriot pass catchers right now.
Very true. Very, very true. You're not down bad if you're starting any of the Rams against the Commanders. And Stafford is still 8th in the league in yards per attempt. And the Commanders are continuing to generate a dead last rate of pressure ever since they traded both Montez Sweat and Chase Young. Stafford now, too, ever since he returned from his injury. We had to watch Brett Rippon for a start, only for the Rams to cut him literally the week after. And then Stafford came back, was banged up against the Seahawks, averaged 5.5 yards per attempt, was terrible. And then the last 3 games now, at least 3 touchdowns in each of them, over 8 yards per attempt in all 3 as well. He's been awesome. And now he gets the best spot possible.
Matthew Stafford, just tearing up the Browns, tearing up the Ravens in 2 bad spots, and now he's at home against the Commanders. This is just so tasty. And obviously you're starting Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. But I also think Demarcus Robinson, I have him listed as a sneaky start if Tutu Atwell is out. I believe he was concussed and is probably unlikely to play if he's not back at practice already. Demarcus Robinson in the last 2 weeks, 4 for 55 and a touchdown on 5 targets 2 weeks ago, and then 3 for 46 and a touchdown on 10 targets last week. His playing time spiked to 86% due to the concussion last week. I think if he is active, or if Tutu Atwell is inactive, then Robinson is a live sleeper this week.
Kyron Williams also an incredible play, because not only can he take the touchdown equity away from Matthew Stafford, but the Rams have run the ball at the 4th highest rate with a 2-score lead. We expect the Rams to have ever since Kyron returned. He's also out-touched Royce Freeman 52-4 over his last 2 games. So Kyron Williams should be a top 3 back. What an amazing spot for him too. On the Commander side of the ball, it's the opposite Joe Flacco. and that Joe Flacco has been getting the volume, and so that's maybe why he gets there against the Browns, although I have my doubts. For Sam Howell, he's been getting the volume, but he's actually fallen apart the last 3 games. It's been bad. And the worst part is he's not really taking anyone with him. Like the receivers, Terry McLaurin, last we saw, ran all the routes, but left us with a dud. And so technically we think since he's going to be operating from a clean pocket, most likely, Howell can help us out. But I'm very much worried about this Washington offense.
From a passing standpoint, it's been pretty ugly the last 3 games really for Howell, but he did have 300 yards against Dallas and a rushing touchdown. And then last week, or week 13 against Miami, 127 yards passing, pretty bad, but he had 2 rushing touchdowns. So Howell, I think, is a fine start against the Rams. Maybe the bye week, they're able to sort some things out and get things back on track for him, because he was playing quite well from week 5 to week 10. It's just been the last 3 weeks against the Giants, Dallas, 2 teams that probably studied him and know him the best. And then, of course, Miami, which is a kind of a weird matchup, I think, for the Commanders. This might be an okay bounce back game for Howell.
I would, as we do every week, though, whether you play Howell or not, I would feel comfortable streaming the Rams defense as well in this game. For the 49ers and Cardinals, last time we saw the 49ers against the Cardinals, Christian McCaffrey had 4 touchdowns, and the 49ers laid it on them, which I would imagine we're in the same exact spot here, as Brock Purdy is no longer game managing. He's just destroying you. Also, the Cardinals are second to last in pressure rate now in the league, and Brock Purdy's leading the league in completion rate and yards per attempt from a clean pocket. So it's kind of a game where you get everyone for the 49ers involved, because anyone can get there.
I think you have to pretty much start everybody. I don't know a situation where you're dealing with benching Ayuk or Deebo Samuel or anything like that. This is a interesting game for Deebo Samuel, though. He had a goose egg against Arizona in week 4, 3 carries for 6 yards, but that was so long ago relative to how he's performing fantasy wise. He's got so many touchdowns in the last 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 touchdowns in the last 5 games. 7 catches in 2 of the last 3 games. In the game where he didn't have 7 catches, he had 2 passing or receiving touchdowns, 1 rushing touchdown. So he's on fire. I would definitely start him. Definitely start Ayuk. Pretty much, very likely start George Kittle unless you have an amazing tight end core, and then obviously CMC's in the lineup. So Purdy is as well. He's in my top 6 this week. I think the one concern is you don't get a whole lot of pushback from the Cardinals.
Definitely. And how are you viewing the Cardinals with Marquise Brown and Michael Wilson returning to practice?
If Wilson's back, it's going to change things a little bit. But, I think Marquise Brown is other than Trey McBride, who sees a lot of usage, even if it's a bad matchup against the 49ers, which it is, they're second on adjusted fantasy points allowed to tight ends. I'm still starting McBride. Marquise Brown is wide receiver 3-4 for me this week. I don't feel great about it. But there really isn't anyone else in this offense. Maybe James Conner at running back just due to touches. But you're worried about the Cardinals moving the ball consistently on the 49ers defense, which is really talented.
Cowboys and Bills. And I know the total says 51 points. I know the Bills are favored. I'm not buying either of it. It's not like the Bills have been a better offense under Joe Brady. They've actually slowed it down and made games a little more boring. And for Josh Allen, like the Cowboys are one of 2 defenses playing man coverage, and over 40% of their defensive snaps, Allen is 20th in both completion rate and yards per attempt against man this year. And I think it's because he doesn't have the players who can separate. Like Gabe Davis has been much better at earning targets against zone for his entire career. And now we have also James Cook, who is doing well, but it could be a situation like last week too, where James Cook was the only player doing anything for Buffalo in the first half. And then inexplicably, they just stopped using him altogether in the second half because they hate offense. So it's just a weird spot for the Bills. And yes, Josh Allen has 19 carries over the last 2 games, but I am worried for the ceiling outcome of everyone in this one.
I wonder what his splits are in terms of running the ball when it's man versus zone, because it seems like man is less able to stop a running quarterback. So maybe we'll see a big rushing game out of Josh Allen. Mm-hmm. But yeah, they run zone at the lowest rate, I think, in the league. The Cowboys do. So So you're thinking this is going to be a lower scoring game than the total?
I do. I definitely do. I don't have I don't think the Cowboys will struggle because the Bills defense are yet again dealing with more injuries. Like, I don't think we get Micah Hyde. We're missing a couple other starters here as well. And it's not like you're benching Stephon Diggs, Josh Allen, James Cook anyhow. But I'm definitely worried about the output for this one for sure. Because even for the Cowboys, although I think they'll move the ball, they just came off 3 straight home games. Now they're traveling across country for also a big matchup on the road in the cold. It's not as comfortable a situation as they've had the last 3 weeks as well.
Pollard, I have at 11. CeeDee Lamb is obviously a must play. Brandon Cooks kind of came down to earth after he was on fire. I had him ranked in the top 30 last week, and he didn't deliver. It was actually Gallup, I think, that got the touchdown. But I've got him ranked as a wide receiver 4. Ferguson is a solid start. Yeah, this is an interesting game given your comments about the total, and maybe it's not going to be as high scoring as you thought. If the Cowboys do put up points, though, that's going to force the Bills' hand, and they're not going to be able to play slow. But you do wonder. I mean, Josh Allen's a do-it-all. You're starting him, and Diggs you are as well. Kincaid is he's been dinged up. He's in a red no contact jersey. He's got a couple injuries, so that's something to keep an eye on. If he has to sit, Dawson Knox becomes a pretty interesting streamer.
Definitely. And Kincaid did lead the Bills in routes run more than any other player, Diggs included, last week before he suffered that shoulder injury. So they did go back to a higher rate of 12 personnel, but it wasn't as if Knox was out there taking away from Kincaid. So at least we can still start Kincaid if he's available in this game. And for Tony Pollard, it's not the best of matchup, but not only are we seeing the touchdown regression happen based on his usage, the touchdowns weren't coming along with in the first half, but now in the last 3 weeks, 19, 23, 23 touches. They're just giving him everything. So can certainly have confidence in him in this one as well. But as a fringe shootout, a shootout I actually don't believe in whatsoever, I do want to get away from Gabe Davis and Brandon Cooks, whereas last week I wanted to play them. I did play them despite the egg that Gabe Davis gave us, and Brandon Cooks, who you said has become more touchdown dependent than he was like in the middle portion of the season. They just kind of forgot how to use him, honestly. Sunday night, Ravens at Jaguars. We've now seen, without Christian Kirk the last 2 weeks and Trevor Lawrence on the field, Zay Jones has matched Calvin Ridley for a team-high 19 targets each. Evan Ingram also popped up last week with 2 touchdowns. Your thoughts on the Jaguars' passing game in this one?
I have Zay Jones as a sneaky start, despite a bad matchup against the Ravens, who are 7th in adjusted fantasy points allowed to receivers. He's popping in the Week 15 breakout receiver model. He's number 2 in that. And I don't know if they were air yards or prayer yards last week. I knew they were chucking the ball deep to him. He has 22 targets in the last 2 weeks. He has the 2nd most air yards in that span as well. So he is somebody that regression will hit at some point, and we know that he does catch touchdowns. We've seen it in the past. So sort of bullish on him as a dart throw. Ridley's fine. You're probably starting him unless you have better options, clearly. Ingram had the, real good game last week. I think he's a really solid tight end 1. It looks like Trevor Lawrence just played through this high ankle sprain with no problems, and he was even running the ball a little bit. So, tough character there, Trevor Lawrence.
For the Ravens, Odell Beckham isn't someone I want to get excited about. You have to break your brain to get there, because now in this last 5-week stretch where he's been relevant as a starter, he's still run a route on less than 50% of their dropbacks. But it's what he's doing with those routes, because his 33% target per route run rate is 3rd in the league, only to Tyreek Hill and Michael Pittman in that time. And now it's this Jags secondary that's allowing the 4th most points per game to opposing wide receivers. So without Mark Andrews again, it just seems like a spot where Odell Beckham is absolutely a relevant wide receiver 3 play.
Yeah, it's funny looking at his game log, and you see him, running, playing 54% of the snaps and doing what he's done on that. But maybe that's the solution for really talented older players. You just have them out there for most of the passing downs, if not all of them. And then, Lamar Jackson, 43 pass attempts last week, 32 the week before. They're throwing the ball a little bit more, and this is a pass funnel, as you alluded to with the Jaguars. Like, they've been getting killed against the pass. So I think Zay Flowers is a must start. Beckham is a nice sneaky start, I think. And Isaiah Likely, had the breakout game last week. Really nice low-end tight end 1 streamer in this matchup against the Jaguars.
And finally, on to Monday Night Football between the Eagles and Seahawks. And again, I don't know just yet, since they don't get practice reports until Thursday, who is starting for the Seahawks between Geno Smith and Drew Lock. But either way, it's someone I want to be on if I'm waiting for it, because we've now seen the Eagles secondary, including last week, allow an average of 312 yards, 2.8 touchdowns, and 27 fantasy points over their last 6 games to opposing quarterbacks. So even if it's Locke, who's just been a gunslinger, as he typically is, lighting it up against them, it's a piece I want, including DK Metcalf.
Yeah, looking at Locke's line, we shouldn't be too worried about the receivers if he's the quarterback. He had 269 yards, 8.7 yards per attempt, 2 touchdowns. He had the 2 picks because you're going to get that with Drew Lock. But, what you're worried about was from a receiver standpoint is the 269 and 2. So Tyler Lockett, 6 for 89. DK Metcalf had the touchdown, 5 targets. So Jackson Smith and Jigba actually led the team in targets with 7. And that was against San Francisco. Good defense. So against the Eagles, who are really tough to run on, pretty low volume against them as well. A lot of volume in the passing game. You could see, if it's Lock, 40 pass attempts, and that's going to boost all these guys into starter territory, I think.
Your thoughts on the Eagles offense with Dallas Goedert back on the other side?
This looks like a good spot for pretty much everybody. I mean, Devonta Smith is the one guy you're like, oh, well, Goddard's back, but he's still been playing well. The Seahawks defense has been kind of sketchy lately. I think you're starting everybody unless you have a better running back than maybe DeAndre Swift. And then Goddard, first came back last week, probably should be, getting more up to speed. He's sort of falling into that low end tight end 1 territory where you're just not sure now. He just hasn't been incorporated in the offense. So it's been more Devonta Smith. How quickly do they move back to their, the equilibrium between those 3 receivers, with AJ Brown as the clear wide receiver 1, and then either Devonta Smith or Dallas Goedert going off in any given week.
And with that, that's the best we can do for right now, given all the injuries we're all still waiting on. But at least some matchup previews for everyone that we had in store. What else do you have for everyone on the site the rest of the week?
Sneaky Starts was posted today, so take a look at that if you're struggling for starts, and then just keep an eye on the rankings. This will be with all the injuries, it'll be a week where I'm updating probably up until kickoff Sunday morning. We'll see what the weather looks like around the league. We saw it last week that the weather started kicking in. We had some weather games. It's been a really quiet year for that, so stay tuned this week to see what happens.
And we'll be back, as always, with DFS content Friday, 6 p.m. Eastern, myself, TJ Hernandez, and Pat Carrain. So until then, good luck this week. And remember, be a little bit kinder than what's required. We'll see you next time.